Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks and welcome to our June webinar. As we get into summer, kind of zooming out a little bit and thinking about just fundamentals. What are the key elements that need to be in place for all of this stuff to work? I think everybody's experienced the challenge when you're getting into a project and realize that maybe there's a piece missing, whether that's organizationally in terms of everybody being on the same page about what are our goals, how are we measuring success ahead of time and afterwards. And then, of course, there's the technical side. What do we know about our building? What specifically are we trying to do? Do we have all of the information that we need to get things off the ground and in the right direction? Because, of course, once things stall, they can stall for a long time. So today we'll be talking about, again, zooming out some fundamental ideas about how to get at that and achieve a successful energy and water strategy. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, the LA Department of Water and Power. They are our funder and make all of this work possible. So special thank you to DWP for your leadership and for supporting this initiative. A few housekeeping things. The lines will be muted to keep things orderly. We will have time at the end for Q&A, so please do type your questions into the chat box and we'll work to try to get through all of those. Today's presentation will be very conversational and visual, so we will be adding notes and text in the version of the PowerPoint that we will send around to you all with the recording. Today's conversation is going to be, again, very visual, so don't worry too much that there's not a lot of text on the screen. It's going to be fun and hopefully entertaining. I'm Dave Hodgins, Executive Director here at LA Better Buildings Challenge. I will not be talking much today. We have two great speakers, Sarah Neff, Senior Vice President, Sustainability at Kilroy, doing tons of great stuff and I think a great example of executing on these fundamentals, and she knows everybody in this business, being on the board of so many organizations, and I think brings a great perspective on what makes Kilroy unique, but also on strategies, things to think about, how to apply what's worked for her within other organizations in a more general way. So really appreciate Sarah joining us. And Wayne Aldridge is one of our technical advisors here at the LA Better Buildings Challenge. He's also a practitioner working for a firm called BCA Green and has a very long resume. And I can't fit all the acronyms on this screen that Wayne holds, all the certifications that he holds. So he'll be talking about the technical, and they will jump in on each other's segments. I encourage them to do that because the technical and the business, of course, intersect and reinforce each other or fight each other when you come to thinking about a lot of these ideas. So again, it's going to be pretty fluid and should be fun. Just to tell you what we're going to tell you, the learning objectives, leases are key. The contracts that govern how the money flows, responsibilities flow, are fundamental. And so getting that right up front is absolutely one of the key things to be thinking about. And that looks different in every organization. Sarah's going to talk about that. Wayne is going to take that idea through to execution of projects as well. What are some O&M practices, shifting to the building side, O&M practices that support smart retrofits, how to get the data to support budgeting conversations, whether that's upfront or after the fact, and getting quick wins to show results that support bigger projects. And speaking of bigger projects, how to fit within the overall investment strategy for your organization, your company. That looks different. And so the better job we can do of scoping and sizing things to work within that investment strategy, or looking at the rent rolls as leases are rolling and TIs are coming up. All of that is key to having this all make sense and ultimately get approved and be successful, move forward to execution. So with that,
I will hand it over to Sarah Neff.
Thanks so much, Dave, and I'm excited to be here. This is a talk today about the fundamentals of launching an energy efficiency project. And what I want to sort of lay a bit of a framework around this, which is if you're at a company that doesn't have a sustainability program yet, if it's something that's just starting out, I think it's really important to think of this as organizational change. Okay, so it's not just, oh, here's a menu of things I'd like to do and you just order it. No, it's really changing how your organization is thinking about sustainability. And as a result of that, I would like to invite you guys to think of yourselves as hackers, right? People who can hack an organization. So when I go through the fundamentals of starting a great energy efficiency program, I will be sort of referencing how how a hacker might view, how that might view the world and how that might interact with what it is that you're doing. So let's just get to it. So let's get to our first fundamental. Dave, you can go to the next slide. Okay, great. So the first fundamental of an energy efficiency program that's successful, although probably the hardest one to achieve, is having an investment budget. You can't really get energy efficiency done without some sort of budget for energy efficiency. And so this is quite difficult. To actually be like, hey, just trust me, hand me some cash. I'm sure I'll get something done with it. And so the way that which is I think really, really important in terms of like one of the major hacking fundamental principles is around attitude is no substitute for competence. It's one of the major hacker principles. And so this is one of the things where you can ask for a budget, but the really important thing is to show that you know how to manage projects and can measure those results. So in order to get some sort of budget for folks who are already at companies, showing that you've been able to manage, portions of budgets that you've gotten off of other projects, maybe a TI happened and you're really able to procure some really cost-effective but really efficient lights. And then measuring those results. So remember, we just can't go off and ask for a capital budget. We really have to have some sort of proof that we're doing something really right in order to be able to get that trust. And then once you do have it, make sure you're constantly measuring the results of what you've done. If you've done a lighting retrofit, I think a lot of us, myself included, don't want to bother with going and doing the measurement and verification. We want to go do the next project. It's hard to get projects done, and Wayne will get into more of the technical later. But it's really important to take the time to both calculate, hey, I did this really great project. We've saved, X number of kilowatt hours. It had a 2.3-year payback. We're saving this number of dollars a year, and maybe the Energy Star score has gone up 2 points as a result. And making sure it's very, very clear to everybody is really key. So in terms of having really great energy efficiency programs, the first thing at some point there's going to have to be a dedicated budget for it. And how you get a budget is you earn yourself a budget by showing great competence on other projects. All right, Dave, you can go to the next slide.
Sarah, is that your son?
No, I don't have any sons, so haha, it's okay. I have 2 daughters, but I don't have little suits for them.
I thought for sure it was. Okay.
No, sadly. The next thing is a green lease. And this webinar is so well timed because I just got back from beautiful Salt Lake City, which is a lot warmer actually than Los Angeles right now. And the reason I was in Salt Lake City was to accept a green leasing award on behalf of Kilroy for a lease we did with WeWork. And that program is run by the Institute for Market Transformation. So my major principle that relates to getting a green lease is the principle that no problem should have to be solved twice. And so the reason I say that here is that there is a whole lot of work out there on green leases. City of Denver is about to, in fact, launch a green leasing whole ordinance program. A lot of people have been working on green leases. The best resource for green leasing is the organization that gives out the awards. It's the Institute for Market Transformation. And the Institute for Market Transformation, sorry guys, I'm somewhere louder than I expected it to be, is a nonprofit out of DC, and they really believe that the way to transform the built environment is through the lease. So what makes a green lease? Why, how do you call a lease green? Well, green leases have two sort of fundamental things in them, and they have a lot of other stuff that's maybe not as fundamental. So the first thing that capital recovery language, that means that this is the major problem between landlords and tenants, right? Which is, I'm the landlord, I would really like to do let's use our old lighting retrofit example. I'd like to retrofit some parking lot lights, but the tenant is the person who ultimately benefits from those energy bills, and I have no way to get the money back of my investment. So the tenant is getting all the benefit, all of the cost is on my side, all of a sudden I have no motivation whatsoever to do that kind of project. And so the fundamental thing about a green lease is capital recovery language. In the Kilroy lease, it says that I can do, without tenant permission, an efficiency project, something that has a payback to it, as long as, and I can recover that capital over the payback period. Normally, for capital investments, I can do them, but I would be recovering those over the lifetime of the equipment, which does not work particularly well for something like an LED that's going to be around for 20 years when tenants are rolling every 5 years. The major thing is capital recovery. The other sort of, they think of it as a prerequisite, is actually having sustainability person contact information in there. That may seem strange, but the idea is that you want the tenant to know that sustainability is important to the landlord. If they have questions about sustainability, they want to engage, they have a way to do it that's easy. So my contact information is in there. Here's some other important things about a green lease. This comes up a lot in Los Angeles with our benchmarking law, is utility disclosure language. All of the killer leases say that if you're a tenant that gets to pay their own utilities, you have to, on my request, give me your energy data, your water data, and your waste data. So that's critically important. We also have language around participating in things like LEED certifications, complying with the green cleaning program, and some stuff around leak detection, water sensors, that kind of thing. So that is what a green lease is. But it's all well and good to put those things in your lease, but they're listen to you and good to put all these nice things into your lease template if your broker has no idea why you're doing it. Because really the other side of this is there has to be broker engagement. Brokers need to understand why you put this language in, because it will immediately otherwise get struck in the lease negotiation. Your asset managers and your brokers need to understand that this language is important to us. It is not a burden. There are many companies out there that have this language. Kilroy is one. You can look up who my fellow winners of green lease leaders are. You can look at the green leasing library to see other examples of green leases. This is becoming standard practice. It's best practice. It protects the landlord. It protects the tenant from paying too much on their energy bills. It's very, very important. So it's both having the green lease and then engaging the broker to make sure that that language stays in the lease. And next. Great. And the next fundamental piece, and maybe the easiest piece of a green program, is transparency. There's no real such thing as a great energy efficiency program if you are not publishing your results. It's really important to get your data and to get it out there. But the hacker principle that's really important here is boredom and drudgery are evil. Getting data is really hard, and making other people be burdened to get your data for you is not a good thing. It's a great way to make everybody hate you. So yes, we want to have our data. We want to put it ideally on our websites or in sustainability reports or somewhere externally so that it can be seen. This is something about companies that get scraped a lot in a lot of investor disclosures. Look at what we're publicly saying about our energy and our water use. To get this data to you is a really good way to get them to not like you very much. There's a lot of great ways to automate this data through, for example, Energy Star Portfolio Manager, depending on what your utility is, or through a third party. We, for less money than we were otherwise paying for Energy Star certifications, use a third party to also do our automated energy and water benchmarking. And so it's really, really critically important. And then what are you supposed to do with your data? So like, why do you have this data if you're not sort of doing anything with it? And I just want to provide the perspective here on this call that right now, in the world of sustainability, which is a little bit funny, we have investors who really care about sustainability. They're starting to really notice. I'm having more investor calls in the last 18 months than I've had my previous 9 years at Kilroy. But the investors don't really know how to interpret the data. It's tricky. You know, you have a company like mine that has been really focused on energy efficiency for the last 10 years. Well, you know, we feel really lucky if we can show 2 and 3% reductions. But a company that's never focused on energy efficiency and finally has a program starting, maybe anything less than a 10% reduction would be kind of pathetic. And trying to compare apples to apples across the thousands of companies in their portfolios are really difficult. But what they do know, what they can use as a number that's pretty reliable is data coverage. And so that's why having a lot of your data and being transparent about it is really, really important. The other thing is once you have your data, it's much easier to do the financial modeling to be able to justify projects out of that capital budget you were going for. So transparency is really important, but layered onto that, please don't burden a whole lot of other people with saving the data. There are resources for Better Buildings Challenge and others that can help you with this data. So it's really, really important to get. Obviously, you're complying with our benchmarking ordinances, California's and the cities, and if you have stuff in San Francisco there, and if you have stuff in San Diego there. But we're going to do it in a way that keeps our teams happy, and in as much as we do need to bother them, want to make sure that we are being really, really grateful. So before I turn it back over to Dave and then to Wayne, I want to sort of recap where we're at. So we want at some point, we've got to get ourselves to a standalone sustainability budget. But to do that, we can't just ask for it, we have to show confidence. Attitude is no substitute for confidence. The next thing that we are going to need eventually is a green lease. That's going to allow us to actually do these projects in our building. It's all well and good to have a budget, but if you can't actually spend it because you can't recover your capital, that's never going to happen. But no need to invent the wheel here. Remember, no problem should have to be solved twice. That's a great hacking principle. And then the third thing is transparency. It's important to show what's going on. You have to think of it like a financial statement. Publicly traded companies publish their financials. The same thing needs to be true of your energy and your water and eventually your waste data and your carbon data. But you're going to do it in such a way that doesn't burden your staff too much. So remember, boredom and drudgery are evil. So that is where I will stop for now and turn it back over to Dave and Wayne.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And I just wanted to underline one point that you made, which is trying to make the acquisition of data as easy as possible and to not, make it onerous and boring data entry for people. One update I wanted to make sure everybody's aware of is that LADWP can now provide automated monthly uploads of your whole building data, your aggregated whole building data, including any sub-metered tenant space. There's some caveats with that if you've only got 1 or 2 tenants in the building. But if you go through the data request process with LADWP now, which is also very streamlined, they've removed the proof of ownership requirements and now will accept a self-certification letter that the person requesting the data is authorized to receive it. Once you get through that process one time, they will upload 5 years of aggregated historical electricity and water data and then provide you monthly updates. So that is a new change. It has not been widely communicated yet, but wanted to make sure that everybody is aware of that and really gets to that point of removing the sort of onerous, tedium of all that process and data entry, and you can set it and forget it and focus on working with that data. It also is transparent. It's on various websites, but working with that data and communicating to your stakeholders, whether that's trying to do better or touting some successes. So little plug for DWP there. They've really improved things. With that
is such fantastic news. I would also just like to give a little piece of advice. Take it from somebody who didn't do this correctly. Once you get that beautiful whole building aggregated data, still keep a record of the load that is in the landlord name you know, if you're paying any common areas or whatever. This is because eventually we're all going to be sort of pushed towards doing some carbon accounting. Kilroy started doing this 3 years ago, and we weren't good about making sure that we kept a separate record of our common area meters versus the whole building when we would get the data from our utilities. And the problem is the common area meters are still in what's called our scope 2 for carbon, and going and getting it, going and backing it all out at the end was really, really time consuming, and I wish we kept better records going in. So definitely the whole building data is amazing. I just really would recommend making sure that there's also some way to get the, to keep a record of the landlord controlled consumption, because these requests for things around carbon are becoming more and more frequent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely a best practice, and I think that would be a good thing to follow up on for those who are interested in getting ahead on that. Is, you know, preparing for this focus on carbon accounting and who's responsible for what, and then how that translates into just maintenance of records within Portfolio Manager and other systems that you might be using to track, you know, related data. So great point.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, with that, I'd like to hand it over to Wayne Aldridge, technical advisor with LABBC, to talk about some fundamentals from the more the building side, or technical side. And all of this will relate back to a lot of what Sarah was talking about. So Wayne, take it away.
Thank you, David. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the overall process, not actually changing out any equipment or doing any upgrades physically, but how you're going to get to that point. And getting to that point is going to require some investigation, some analysis, and then some planning. Next slide. So starting off your investigation, you really need to focus on understanding what you're required to provide. So we know that owners have to provide a lighted, sanitary, and ventilated building, but there's differences between required lease hours that were negotiated versus building hours that are standard. There may be some environmental conditions that special temperature control or humidity control. There may be overstandard lighting required. What is overstandard? What is building standard? What can the tenant be billed for? Now, and that was one of the things that on the capital recovery language in the green lease that Sarah was speaking about. That's one of the key understandings that you need to have when you start your investigation. We can go to the next slide. So we need to understand in that investigation, what is the system's current capability? And things change from time to time, but the systems were installed at a certain point in time, and they were designed for a certain purpose. Perhaps you have a building where you had a law firm that only had 3 people per 1,000 square feet, but now maybe a call center is coming in that's going to have 1 per 100. That's going to create different demands on everything from lighting and ventilation and temperature control. Everything is going to change. Water's going to change, maybe extra bathroom fixtures, etc. What code cycle were these equipment put under? They met code at the time, but are they going to meet codes coming up? And what's going to be happening? Is it efficient or not? We also get into who is going to be paying the bill. As Sarah mentioned, there is aggregated information that comes from the tenants. You have your own house bill, if you want to call it that, that you may be able to escalate. You may have something that the owner has to pay for on their own. So how do these systems affect the overall performance of the building financially? Every building has to make money or there can't be a building. So these checks and balances come into play, and that's another key point of the investigation. Next slide. So determining the life expectancy of the equipment that you have compared to the leases that you currently have is one of the strategies that you also want to focus on when it comes to understanding how you're going to meet your lease requirements. Now, the equipment condition is kind of obvious, but there's also upcoming regulations. We know that we're moving to an electrified society, and so that means that there's stiffer and stricter regulations when it comes to combustion equipment, like boilers and things like that. So perhaps the life expectancy of the equipment, it could function well, but you might get into permitting requirements, or you might get into carbon disclosure requirements, like Sarah was talking about, where having that combustion equipment on site is not going to be beneficial to the overall financial goals of your property. And then comparing that to the lease, what is your projected rent roll? What's going to be happening in your building? Do you have specific tenants that you think are going to re-sign? And do you have specific tenants who you are pretty much sure they're going to move out? And what's going to be beneficial to have in your building in order to gain that new tenant? Or maybe you need to have some upgrades in order to make sure that you retain those valuable tenants. So once you know what you have, then you can start your analysis. And the analysis is really on identifying the gaps in your system's capabilities and your requirements, and you put all these tidbits of information together and figure out how the pieces of the puzzle fit. And what should be retained, what should be let go, what should we plan on in the future? Should we work hard to retain this tenant? Should we let that lease expire because we need to do a refresh anyway, and it's going to help out the overall performance of the building's financial situation? We can go on to the next slide. And determining if the systems can be repaired or upgraded, or maybe even reprogrammed if you have an automation system that handles everything, that has to fit into this toolbox, is understanding what the equipment can do. Now, what's going to be triggered by code? For instance, if you're going to be doing a TI, you may have an alteration or a tenant improvement that is over $200,000. Most of them are when you talk about a larger, not just paint and carpet. Well, that triggers a lot of things in the code. So like, for instance, toilets. Toilets in your whole building would actually be triggered to be replaced in certain situations when you have a single TI. So that may urge you into, well, if I'm going to have to change my toilets anyway on a TI, but maybe I have a green lease to where it's a water saving feature, it's going to save the tenants money. Maybe I should go ahead and upgrade my plumbing fixtures now, escalate that whole project of upgrading these systems and get that covered by the tenants while I still have tenants in the building, so that it doesn't get triggered by a TI, in which case there'd be an arguing point of, well, you had to upgrade the fixtures in the bathrooms because of that one tenant. Why should I have to pay for that? That's a valid point to argue.
Yeah, and Wayne, if I can just jump in, one of the things that I have learned is you can change out toilets and urinals without people having too much of a fuss. So people really care a lot if when we put aerators on our sinks, if people feel like there's a lower flow rate. It's so much of a better idea to do that. Not to say they can't do it, and not to say that we haven't, when the tenant is moving in, as opposed to being like, oh, it doesn't matter, I'll just kick the can and deal with it down the road. Because that retrofit later is just sort of hard from a relational standpoint.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the same thing you may find about lighting controls also. Lighting controls get triggered, as well as ADA, gets triggered by alterations. And when an existing tenant has a small little remodel and the lighting controls get triggered, they have become used to their original lighting design, and you can get that as well. So that's a great point, and in the same case holds for lighting controls as well. Thank you. And if you have an automation system, you can perhaps find out how this can be reprogrammed in order to make sure that your systems remain not only in balance, but also are dialed in to be highly efficient during the lease hours and prevent excessive run times, overlighting, high water temperatures, etc. And you can dial that back in and maybe do your cost recovery, because that capital recovery is a big deal. So when tenants are using overstandard systems, that's a great way to get back some capital. Next slide. So then we get into, we've got those pieces, we kind of understand what our systems are. Now we're going to get into the analysis. And this is where the number crunching really comes in. We want to take a look at not just life cycle costs versus the new system or upgrade and find out what has a better life cycle cost. We need to calculate what the overall efficiency is going to be, and then there's also cases where a replacement on failure is a valid philosophy, meaning just run it into the ground until it fails and replace it when it dies. That is a valid philosophy. For instance, I'll give an example of the hand dryer. A hand dryer on the wall, if you're going to do preventive maintenance and you're going to keep track of it and you're going to do inventory control and you're going to do for something that's, you know, $300, it's a waste of time. You really just kind of, you know, make sure it's clean and run until it dies and replace it wholesale. Financially, that's a better methodology for systems that may be like that. So you may have other systems like certain lighting systems, certain plumbing systems, certain HVAC systems that you may have components that are just, we're going to run it till it dies and then we're going to replace it wholesale. Next slide. So now comes some planning. You need to determine what can be escalated and what does the owner absolutely have to pay for. And as an example, like the toilets, it might be triggered by a TI, so should you replace it now? The same thing with the lighting controls. There are strategies for also the tenant satisfaction. So you may have lighting drivers or the lighting lamps, if we want to call them that, that you may want to change out when a new tenant comes in or before they come in. But maybe you're going to have a tenant that wants to have their own overstandard lighting. So you do want to find out, you know, what are you going to give up in a TI as far as a credit that's going to go into their TI allocation, or what you're going to cover on your own. Next slide. And then you want to determine the best time to upgrade. Now, most buildings do have a 5-year capital plan or sometimes a 3-year capital plan, but a 5-year capital plan really should be the start, only the start. When it comes to equipment and systems, they have a very long life expectancy and an efficiency expectancy. Equipment lasts 15, 20, sometimes even 30 years or more. So you should also consider having a 10-year, 15-year equipment plan and coordinate that on a calendar where you can see the equipment that's going to be associated with specific leases and what those terms are, and kind of figure out strategically how to fit that into your leasing plan and your occupancy plan. And next slide. Now, another thing is you want to start your communications with your rebates early. And rebates and incentives really help out getting a project funded. You do have to have the commitment, and you do have to have a financial strategy built in, but the rebates communications early and often. This is where you may be required for measurement and verification, and and you can also get some guidance from the utilities.
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say there's two things on that. One is that it's our best practice at Kilroy to ask our service providers to do the rebate work and to take that the rebate amount off the upfront capital cost of the project. The reason we do that is not because we are lazy, but because we find that if service providers aren't on the hook for getting the rebates often do not materialize. It keeps people careful about what is and is not on a rebate list, and it makes sure people sort of stay on top of it. The other thing I would say is you also have to really take, if you're going to have a project, and we've had many that are reliant on utility rebates, really scheduling in the time for utility pre-inspection is critical. They can take months. And so if you're really expecting a project to get done before, summer, but you haven't told the utility until May that you're doing the project, it's probably not going to happen. I mean, we've waited up to 7 months for utility pre-inspection. And so that's just a really important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. That actually was the next point I was going to bring up is pre-inspections. Yeah, pre-inspections, and sometimes there's even progress inspections too, to make sure that certain stages have followed the correct guidance. And measurement verification, like Sarah, like you had talked about earlier, that may be required. And so you need to not think that in your capital plan that you're setting up, you say, oh, well, we're going to be able to do this, put in this equipment and it's going to cost us this much money. Let's go ahead and plan for that. But then you find out to get the rebate, you have to also have measurement verification, or there's a new code where you have to have, perhaps it's something dealing with the HVAC and you need fault detection and diagnostics, or you need some sort of tracking. That could add money into the cost of the system in order to get the rebate. So the earlier you can talk to where the rebates are coming from, whether it be a utility or a state department, like Department of Water Resources or something, the earlier you can talk to them about what you're planning, the better off you're going to be. And don't forget about the tax laws. Certain energy efficiency projects and renewable energy projects can qualify for 100% first-year depreciation. So that can completely change the financial dynamics. So rebate talk is one thing, but also get with your CFO, talk about what financial metrics are out there dealing with taxes.
Wayne, I wanted to interject a quick point and underline what you're saying. Checking in with the utilities well in advance is definitely a best practice. The incentive programs do change, and they did change this year, effective January 1. DWP's main program, the Custom Performance Program, now does offer about 64 deemed measures, which are relatively simple, do not require measurement and verification. And so to be familiar with what those are, because those can be a faster track. And then others do require measurement and verification. And DWP wants to meet with customers early in the planning stage to get on the same page about how to M&V a specific project in a specific building, so that there's not a disagreement or confusion later. So that's definitely a best practice. And
absolutely.
Yeah, and so one other plug is that on that theme, at our technology showcase, which is coming up on August 9th, it's a Friday, we will be organizing like a speed dating kind of thing, where customers can come, or your vendors can come if you're making them responsible for rebates, which is also a very good practice generally, can come and talk to program managers from DWP and SoCalGas about what you're planning, about what you have coming up, and put a face to a name, exchange business cards, and have that point of contact so you can do exactly what we're talking about here. So first time we've done that. I hope that it's productive for everybody, though, and definitely is something that we see can streamline projects, make sure that you're not leaving money on the table, buying the wrong equipment, or not doing the M&V that you need to do, and then having people be upset later.
Yeah, it cannot be stressed highly enough how important it is to get your utility companies involved early in your plans. Well, let's move on to the last slide. Now, it's really easy to fall into what we refer to as analysis paralysis. And it ends up delaying your decisions. It ends up delaying the project. Like Sarah mentioned, sometimes the steps, you didn't realize how long it was going to take to get something going. And the last thing that you want to have happen to you is when you're performing a repair or replacement, is that you don't get it done in time and you get called out for delaying a TI or preventing somebody from moving in on time or not having something working per the lease. You know, don't fall into the analysis paralysis. Plan way ahead of time. Have long-term capital plans, have long-term equipment plans, and lay this groundwork, have your communications early so that when it comes time to pull a trigger, you can simply just pull it, get it done, and it's out the door, off your plate. And with that, I'll turn it back over to David.
Great, thanks, Wayne. This was a great discussion. And Sarah, lots of key takeaways, and I was taking some notes as you were both talking, and I think I have some others to add. But I think this last point about long-term planning really touches on, kind of encapsulates everything that you've both said. Having a forward-looking plan that includes organizational buy-in from top down. Where are we at in terms of, do we need to earn a dedicated budget or do we have it already? Getting that lease language in place so that you can look in a non-rushed and strategic and then tactical way at what are the opportunities, how does legislation or other drivers like the phase out of combustion equipment or toxic refrigerants, is one that's happened already, mercury in lamps, get ahead of that and have all of that structure in place so that that analysis phase doesn't lead to paralysis. You've got a framework where you're dropping specific projects in and that big picture is already clear. So with that, I'm happy to open it up to some questions from the audience. Please type those in to the Q&A screen and we'll try to cover those. Great, a good question coming in. Sarah, you touched on dedicated budget, but also having a dedicated person whose job this is to coordinate between engineering, facilities management, ownership seems like a key piece. Can you talk about kind of how your role emerged at Kilroy and kind of like a very basic job description?
Sure. Yeah. And more, I see more and more of me popping up, which is great. More and more companies are deciding to make that investment in a full-time sustainability person. There was a long time in Los Angeles where there was only about 2 of us, and now there's 6, and it's growing, which is great. I was hired because Kilroy saw the value in LEED certifications and also got sick of paying consultants for LEED certifications. So I was originally taken on for that, but also because I think it was 2 halves. One was that, but the other was we had a great head of engineering who was also supposed to be running all of the energy efficiency. The thing about energy efficiency is that unless it's an end-of-life equipment situation, it's never an emergency. And so, that poor guy was putting out fires and putting out fires all the time and never really had a chance to focus on the projects that saved energy. And we weren't measuring at the time, we weren't benchmarking at the time, so we didn't really know what the costs were. And so this was such a problem because he really wanted to do the right thing, but it's a full-time job just being head of engineering. And so that was why I was taken on. But I see folks coming to this. I mean, one of the hacker principles that I didn't mention that I also really like is the world is full of interesting problems to be solved. And so often I find people are coming into full-time sustainability roles from other departments where they've said, hey, we really need somebody who can help us with, greening our contracts. There's a lot of people with my job who came from their legal departments. Also IT, who really feels like, we have a lot of controls upgrades that are happy. I need somebody to manage this. Sometimes it is something that comes from engineering or somebody who's really dedicated coming from asset management. So the point is there's a lot of different perspectives on sustainability. So it doesn't have to be, oh, okay, somebody can only do LEED. Maybe that's not something that your company cares about. But there usually is something that your company cares about, and that's the right way to start tackling it.
Mm-hmm. So I guess kind of a related question, and going back to the idea of like organizational change, like the saying goes, that you first have to admit you have a problem, like before you can solve it, right? And I wonder if you could talk about kind of who at Kilroy, whether it was the head of engineering or someone else, realized that there were these problems that needed solving, and that it was important, and that they needed to create a role to take that on. Now, how did that occur?
Yeah, I'm really lucky, it was pressure on our CEO by our board of directors, who had seen the benefits of some green building certifications that we'd gotten, and really felt like this is where the market was going. And our CEO totally agreed. He is somebody who's really dedicated environmentally, and as soon as they said, you really need to get a full-time person, I said, oh my goodness, yes, I need to get a full-time person. And so I was in the right place at the right time. I've certainly seen this happen where there's a very dedicated VP of asset management and engineering who is able to justify and bring on a sustainability person. The concern is always like, how empowered is that person? I mean, it's one thing to be able to do that transparency leg that I was talking about without any ability to execute projects. That person is pretty much stuck in a reporting role. So for people who are thinking of taking on somebody, it's really important to say, what am I going to allow this person to do? Because it's quite disruptive. We are hired to change how the company does business, which is all well and good until you actually go up and try to change how the company does business. And to have them be empowered to do that is critical. Right. And so for those who are taking on the role, right, those who are thinking of having their companies take on the role, really think about what exactly is we want to do. And I think one of the questions was, what is my job scope? So I run energy and water and waste efficiency projects in both our existing portfolio, and then also we're developers. So that's for developing. So and the sort of strategic arm behind all of our LEED certifications, and I sometimes do the documentation and sometimes I don't. Any other major pieces around reporting and transparency and industry engagement, so doing the sustainability report, doing all the investor disclosures. So those are sort of the three buckets I deal with environmentally. I'm also now in charge of corporate social responsibility, which is, human capital development, diversity, health, resilience, all that stuff, but that is beyond the scope of this call. So,
right. And I know your team has, and I know your team has grown to help you do that.
Indeed, yes. We're now
you're a department
very
now.
Proud. Yes, a department. I was a department of one for a long time, and now a department of three.
Cool. That's really helpful, and I think it does, look different for every organization, kind of how that change starts, where that kind of recognition of the opportunity or the problem, depending how you look at it, can come from. And so, for people that are thinking, am I that change agent, or who is that in my organization? I won't give out Sarah's cell phone number, but maybe she'll be willing to talk more about that. I know
I'm very easy to find over email.
Yes. One for Wayne, and we are getting close to our time here, but Wayne, you spoke about how equipment life and lease rollovers and legislation can kind of intersect. I wonder if you can give an example of a project where it kind of can crystallize that for it. I think it makes sense intellectually, but if you could give an example of like a common type of project where there was an opportunity that was presented by kind of the dynamics of the rent roll, if you will, the opportunity that the equipment or systems presented, and then maybe a coming piece of regulation or legislation that sort of gave it a bump.
Well, one of the things that I'll talk about a little bit is for instance, lighting. If lighting gets triggered, alterations are are triggered very easily when it comes to lighting. Simply relocating fixtures can trigger the code. Leaving the fixtures exactly as they are in place and getting a little technical, exactly as it shows on the electrical plan with exactly the load factors that it shows on the electrical plan, doesn't tend to trigger anything. But as soon as you start changing what would have been submitted for a permit originally, that's when they start saying, you know what, we need to see new calculations. We need to see, this needs to be brought up to today's code. So, for instance, a tenant that may want to expand or relocate into another area, that's one of those intersections where if you have a tenant that you know is going to be leaving, try not to do anything with the lighting until after they leave and you find out who's coming in. You know, you don't want, if you know they're going to be leaving, if it's something that you can talk to them about ahead of time, where they may stay in the building, you say, well, you know what, how about if we do, you know, a lighting upgrade because you guys have had some complaints about the lighting. We're in your suite all the time trying to change things. Let's take a look at bringing this up into today's code. Now, we always recommend when we're in doing sustainability consulting, we always recommend looking at the upcoming code cycle to see what's going to be required in the upcoming code cycle. Because when something gets triggered by a TI, it usually falls back into what was adopted. So you usually have a good buffer of at least 3, if not 6 years of technology or specification. For instance, you only have to bring plumbing fixtures up to the previous code, not to today's code, when you have an alteration under, there's the energy code, there's the building code, there's the plumbing code, and there's Cal Green, which is new. So there's multiple different codes that you have to think about. And so we take a look strategically in balancing that out. I hope that kind of gives an idea of, you know, of what you're getting at. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. And maybe to give it back to Sarah to take us home here, thinking about, you know, what's been some of the more difficult lease language to actually implement on? And why is that? Is that related to sort of like magnitude of costs that might be passed through to tenants, you know, due to the nature, you know, dollar price tag on a project that does have an energy payback? What's been kind of the hardest thing to get done and get the brokers not to strike, or that the tenants not to resist?
It's weird. Yeah, it's weird. The language that's been the most controversial is the utility disclosure language.
Really?
That is the language that yes. And it's not that it's a cost, but they just think of it like, oh, it's annoying, which, let's be honest, remember, boredom, drudgery, or evil, it is annoying. So that's the language I find people most often attempt to strike. Now, my asset managers and now my brokers have been very trained that that's not possible, and they point to, you know, whatever the benchmarking ordinance is, or 802 or whatever. So we've had great success in keeping it in, but boy, that is the thing I get the most pushback about, even to this day. You know, sometimes I get annoyed with some of our brokers who say, you guys know better. You know we don't allow a strike to this language. But I also say I can be very flexible. So, you know, I can give you more days to give me the stuff. You don't have to give me your invoices. Sometimes just don't want you to know financially what they're spending, which is a little silly since, like, given that I pay the same rates in the common meter, and I can calculate it. But fine, I will take the data in any form. You want to give me your invoices? You want to give me your Excel sheets? You want to share an Energy Star count with me? You want whatever, smoke signals? I'll take it. So that's right. So yeah, weirdly, it's the utility disclosure language that I find that has been the most problematic, even though that's the one that has the most sort of legal oomph behind it. And I also am able to say that, hey, look, as I explained on the call earlier, with all the investor disclosures, I really have to have full data coverage. But yeah, weirdly, that's the thing that's caused me the most grief.
Interesting. It's not what I thought you would say, and hopefully,
yeah,
you know,
right. That's not what I thought was going to happen.
Yeah. Well, and you know, hopefully with this new process from LADWP, it should mitigate that, because you only have to get tenant consent if there are fewer than 3 commercial accounts in a property. So if you've got, you know, more than 3, you don't even need to get permission. The utility DWP can provide the aggregated whole building data. So, and you don't have to produce deeds of trust, et cetera, to prove that you or your consultant are in fact, you know, authorized to receive this, you know, highly confidential, top secret information that is our electricity consumption.
Yeah, I will say I do have a tenant who has, I think, every reason to feel very sensitively about their energy data. They are a big name tech tenant, and they're worried that if somebody were to see a major drop in energy consumption in that building, then a competitor might know that they've scaled down those operations and can start poaching employees, or maybe their energy has increased, means they're working on some big secret projects. So for those tenants, I do anonymize their data when I do all the reporting. I just make up addresses, and that seemed to work fine. So I mean, that is the only example I have. Otherwise, it's not like these are nuclear launch codes. But
right, and I mean, those are the tenants that everybody wants, and the future is digital. So another
absolutely
best practice and something to pay attention to. But you know, if you've got you know, a tenant that's particularly energy intense, but they're in a building stacked with a bunch of other, you know, more typical type profile tenants, each tenant is not called out. The utility provides the whole building aggregate data. It's not possible with what they provide to necessarily, you know, pinpoint who's using what. So hopefully that helps. With that, wanted to thank both of you again. Quick plug for our next webinar, which will be about water. We'll be talking about case studies, different opportunities to save water in your building and get to that 20% reduction that the city's existing buildings ordinance talks about, and a bunch of other great content and updates. Mo Besnick, our other technical advisor on water, will be presenting, and should be a really great webinar as well. And again, our technology showcase, August 9th, we will have utility reps there from all of the rebate programs. So do come, meet them, talk to them about projects that you're planning. Make sure that you and your vendors are clear on what they're looking for, and start early. I think that was a big theme from today. So we're right at 1 o'clock. I want to make sure to be courteous of everyone's time. Thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.